today in the studio, we have a very special guest by the name of Reverend Samuel Mosteller, who is the state president for the SCLC, which is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine, Chasity. How are you?
I am doing extremely well. Thanks for asking. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir, and why did you want to become a member of the SCLC?
Well, in studying civil rights, and you have to understand, I'm a child of the protest. I was born in the 50s, and so from the 50s all the way to the 70s, that led the headline news every day. Dr. King, some of the first memories I saw on television, and he was so eloquent and so didactic and so huge in his leadership during that time that I recognized that SCLC needed Dr. King, and Dr. King led the SCLC. And without the SCLC, you had no Dr. King, and without Dr. King, you don't have the same type of SCLC. After studying, at West Georgia College and all, I studied in civil rights and did some independent studying in black history. Dr. King was probably the most effective black leader person that we've had in modern or ancient times. He was able to change society, he was able to change culture, he was able to change the law, he was able to dominate the news, he was able to dominate all of the important issues of our time, and he used a biblical base to do it, and which was very difficult. We're talking about segregation, or in new vernacular, slavery by another name, segregation.
Segregation.
Yeah, and that's why SCLC it's taken some lumps over the last few years, but we chalk it up to a family argument, a family fight, and everybody has those, whether someone knows or not. And so we accept those and we move forward, and I think that SCLC will prove itself to be the most nimble of the civil rights or social activist groups as we go into the 21st century.
Okay. Now tell us a little bit about the SCLC and what are some of their programs and initiatives that they have going on as right now? Well,
right now we've just gotten a new president, Reverend Dr. Howard W. Creasy Jr. He grew up in Atlanta, Morehouse man, and he's done a fabulous job in the short time he's been there. We work very closely together. The new vice president is Isaac Newton Ferris of the King family.
Okay.
And I think Marion is the new executive director. And I always get a name. I want to call her Clark, but I don't think that's right. They're all relatively new. I've been on the president of SCLC for Georgia about 3 years, and I'm the founding president for the SCLC Georgia. We formed about 23 viable chapters, and we have around 28 chapters in Georgia.
Strong will.
And what we've done is decided to call it, the last operation for the last 3 years has been the Quiet Storm. I asked them to stay out of the newspaper and do the work in the local areas, Savannah and Rome and Valdosta and St. Mary's and Brunswick and Upson County. That's right. Is that home for you? Is it? Upson County, Macon, a lot of different places that we've gone into to try to set up chapters. Jefferson County, Augusta, on and on. So there are quite a few viable chapters. Cobb County, Valdosta, Cook County. I hate that Albany, Georgia. Those are some of the chapters that are most viable, and we've asked them to do voter registration, stay on top of the education issue in the local areas. And when it comes time, we'll ask them to come to Atlanta to show that SCLC is not a dead organization, nor is it non-viable, but is very relevant to the lives and times of the communities in Georgia.
Okay. Now, what made you want to become the state president for the SCLC, and what are some of your future initiatives that you have in mind?
Well, I was a volunteer for a couple of years, and President Charles Steele Jr., who was the president of SCLC at the time, and who built the SCLC headquarters. By the way, the SCLC headquarters is the only social activist building that's owned by civil rights organization in the country.
Wow.
And so we're on Auburn Avenue, and Dr. Steele is primarily responsible for having it built. 2005, about 2008. So it was him, and he asked that we start to organize Georgia. So myself and Reverend Albert E. Love and several others started organizing. I think there were 4 chapters in Georgia at the time. And we came, we traveled all over recruiting and talking to people about forming chapters and for about a year. And after we formed them, they said, well, we need a constitution. So I ended up chairing the committee for that. And after all the chapters were in place, about 5 or 6 of the chapters were in place, they said, well, we're going to need to set some officers in place. So we suggested some of the older civil rights leaders who are around Atlanta, which are quite a few, might be better at president, but the chapter said, no, we know all of those, but since you've done all the work, we want you to be president. And so I was elected unanimously by all the chapters to be president. And that's been several years ago, but over 3 years ago.
Well, tell us a little bit about your daytime job and what are some of those, because we know you have several.
I just have to call on the Lord and say, Lord, have mercy. Day to day, I'm the headmaster and principal at Green Pastures Christian Schools at 5455 Flat Shoals Parkway in Decatur, Georgia. And the school has been there 30 years. And the CEO is Dr. Colette Gumby. Dr. and Apostle Colette Gumby, and I've been over almost 4 years, the headmaster. We made some innovative changes and brought in automation and tied it closer to the DeKalb County school systems. And we've traveled and seen other people's systems. We're trying to do some extended learning, some automated whiteboards, that kind of innovation so that the children and youth that we have can be trained in a 21st century manner, that they could be leaders in the 21st century. We intend that that institution would be the premier institution on the east side of town for academics. That's what I do. I have another daytime job or weekend job, whichever you call it, nighttime weekend job. I'm the pastor at Good Shepherd Community Church on 445 Lawton Street. Over in the hood, less than a mile from here. We do a lot of work around the AU Center. Primarily now we are interested in organic gardening. We have about 3 acres of organic gardening over there, working with Mr. Bobby Wilson, who is the president of Urban Gardens for the Nation, and Mr. Rashid Nuri, who has the one at Wheat Street over right off Auburn Avenue. So about 3 acres over there. So we're working to try to allow our folks to be sustainable. We believe that the church is not just to preach the gospel, but to live the gospel and show others how to live the gospel. And in order to be a good Christian, you got to produce something. You got to produce something.
Now, do you feel that you could probably implement this plan towards the SCLC and maybe, strive it to go forward as far as with other African Americans or people in general living sustainable and, living the organic life towards a healthy life?
We worked on it all across the state with Fort Valley State University and the president there, Dr. Rivers, and the agricultural department, Tuskegee, Alabama A&M, Florida A&M. We've taken parts of this under the tutelage of one of my mentors, James Orange, who was one of Dr. King's lieutenants, to South Africa. And now they call it in South Africa, after 4 years or 5 years, the agricultural revolution. We took Tuskegee as the agricultural institution, and if you know that history of George Washington Carver and his agricultural revolution. So South Africa has adopted it at the top end of South Africa for the whole of the 9 provinces of South Africa. We've been working specifically in KwaZulu-Natal. That's through the church and through our church at Good Shepherd.
All right.
So yeah, I stay busy and I travel a lot, doing great things, we hope.
Now, how can we get more people involved with SCLC, especially our children? Because I heard you say, the leaders of today, in the 21st century, which are the children. So how can we get these people involved to become more abundant with the SCLC?
Well, it's very difficult because a great number of the youth and children do not understand how they got the freedoms that they have. They assume that Dr. King was contemporary with Abraham Lincoln. and unfortunately, that's not so. It's very difficult because the mindset around young folks is if it's not on TV or in Vibe or in the area or arena that they look into, then it's not real to them. and the people marching that has no impact on their daily life. There's only two kinds of power in America. There's money power and there's people power. Dr. King actualized people power and changed government and money. Aside from those two is, of course, the power of God. But Dr. King was able to leverage those. He showed us how to do it. And everybody's using it except us. They use it in Libya and Egypt, same process.
Especially in Egypt.
The conservative right is using it at the Tea Party. The only one not using it is black folks. We're running around trying to have a fashion show, a singing contest, anything but something serious. And right now, the conservative movement is intent on putting us back in slavery and cutting off every opportunity that's ever been created for black folks, and black folks specifically. I know blacks go around talking about diversity, but after I've studied diversity and looked at it, diversity is everybody else except blacks. You can get gay and transgender, you can get Mexicans, you can get immigrants, you can get any kind of thing, but when you mention black people, you can get no response inside diversity. And I think that's by intention. There's only two people really who have a legitimate claim on atrocities being done to them in America. That's Native American and black Americans. And nobody wants to really talk about that. They moved it off the agenda. Why do you talk about it? Why is it interesting? Because it never was repaired. The damage done to black folks has never been repaired. And so when we say let's move on, what do you mean? Move on to what? Assimilation? Nobody wants us. Who invited you to the table? Nobody's inviting black folks to come to Buckhead and come to the table or come to the formal, or nobody's inviting black folks. We are trying to talk our way in by diversity, but nobody's inviting us. So we need to really do some self-introspection and look. And then some folks say, color doesn't matter. Well, if color didn't matter, why did God make me as black as a patent leather shoe? I say it makes a whole lot of difference. It's always made a difference. It made a difference in segregation. It made a difference when Thomas Jefferson and George Washington was forming America. It made a difference all the way until we got to the place where black folks said they needed to be ensured an opportunity and a chance to contract, to be educated. Then all of a sudden, color doesn't matter. But it still matters because we were the first last hired and first fired. It still matters. And so we have to come out of this fantasy land of saying, color doesn't matter. It matters. Certainly it matters.
Now tell us a little bit about the NAACP versus the SCLC, because I know a lot of people get those two, they think they're the same, but they're really different organizations. So yeah, explain to us what the difference is.
Very different. NAACP, I think, was founded in 1909 out of the Niagara movement by W.E.B. Du Bois, some mulatto blacks and some Jewish folks with Jewish heritage. And it was intended to litigiously, or using legal means, using suits to free us. And they did a really great job of using suits to free black folks. And it lasted all the way to '54. The Brown versus the Board of Education at Topeka. And that one broke segregation. That broke one of the major tenets of segregation, and it took about 40 years to do that. It wasn't the first time segregation had been broken, but they were able to re-break it again at Thurgood Marshall and Attorney Houston from Howard University. They were able to break that out of the strategy, and several others. So the NAACP was set up to help free Jews and mulatto blacks, actually. It's really what it boils down to, if you want to tell the whole truth of it. And so when all of the folks there got an opportunity, they said, no, let's stop right there. Let's don't free up the rest of the black folks. So we had a lot of black people in what we call sharecropping, and they were basically slavery. They couldn't leave. They couldn't leave the land. They had to farm where they were. Couldn't leave the counties. Sheriffs always brought them back. That lasted all the way to 1967. And so segregation came. Dr. King came along. Now he comes along out of the middle class. He comes along out of the affluent class of folks. And he's 26 years old, and he goes to the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama.